Tonight at 6 and I, we have the honor of welcoming Leon Panetta. Mr. Panetta has a long and storied career as a public servant. In 1976, he was elected to the U.S. Congress, where he represented California's 16th Congressional District for 16 years. He acted as President Clinton's Director of the United States Office of Management and Budget, and then as his Chief of Staff from 1994 to 1997. He founded the Leon and Sylvia Panetta Institute for Public Policy, and in 2009, he became the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. From 2011 to 2013, he served as the 23rd United States Secretary of Defense under President Obama. Tonight, Mr. Panetta comes to us with a new memoir, Worthy Fights. In it, he examines his life and political legacy with a focus on his time as Secretary of Defense. His unwavering sense of morality and belief in the exhausting work of public service radiates off every page. As David Ignatius writes in the Washington Post, Panetta comes across in this book as a man who has never shirked a fight he thought was right. Tonight, he will be in conversation with Mike Allen, Chief White House Correspondent for Politico, and the man behind Politico's playbook. Mike is, as the New York Times famously pegged him, the man the White House wakes up to. He's written for publications including Time, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. As Bob Woodward declared, "You don't have to do anything else, just read Mike Allen." They will be in what promises to be a very lively conversation for roughly 40 minutes, after which we'll invite you to join in with questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Leon Panetta and Mike Allen.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. Welcome to all of you out in live stream land. Welcome to all of you who are here. Somebody pointed out to me that this is more expensive than HBO on demand, so we'll try and make that worthwhile. Mr. Secretary, before we start here, a special family in the front row, do you want to say hello to the Bash family?
I'd love to say hello to my rabbi, Jeremy Bash, who is my Chief of Staff, and his lovely wife, Robin. And Jeremy's parents are here as well, and I thank you for coming.
We want to thank Politics and Prose and Sixth and I, this amazing setting. We appreciate it. Welcome to all of you in the balcony as well. We appreciate it as we kick off. Mr. Secretary, you've been out for a week now talking about worthy fights. You've got another week to go. You're about to head to California. Earlier today, did you get tougher questions from the readers at GW or at Costco?
Costco was kind of tough. Yeah, it was, because people are shopping big. They're shopping for big things there, and they want, they want you to deliver the best product you can. And I told them, read the book.
It's pretty big. So, Mr. Secretary, as we heard in the introduction, you've worked in city government, federal government, you've been a Republican, you've been a Democrat, you're a lawyer, you've been an Army Intel officer, you've been the DCIA, you've been legislative assistant, special assistant, executive assistant, which in Washington is sort of our trinity, director of the U.S. Office of Special Rights, congressman, House Budget Chair, White House Budget Director, White House Chief of Staff, SecDef. So what is left on your bucket list?
Well, I'm waiting for the Pope's position to open up. I enjoy being back home in Carmel Valley. As I said, I have a walnut ranch out there, and it's nice to be home working with a different set of nuts. So I'm enjoying that.
Right. Now, almost all of your life experiences and your positions are enviable, but you've done one thing that I'm not sure everyone here would be jealous of. You've been roommates with Senator Schumer.
Yeah, we were all kind of bachelors back here, and that our wives were back in the district, and we came back to Washington, and we were all kind of living separately. And George Miller had a house up on the hill, and George Miller eventually, we were all friends. We'd go out to dinner, and he finally said, "Why don't we all kind of stay together. So we all moved into George Miller's house, and it was 4 congressmen, myself, George Miller, of course, our landlord, Chuck Schumer, and a guy named Marty Russo from Illinois. And Chuck Schumer and I were on the bottom floor, and he slept on the couch, and I had a bed that I moved into one corner of the room downstairs. This was truly Animal House, okay? This was really Animal House. And Chuck was the kind of person, I mean, Chuck would munch on anything. You know, and my son every once in a while would come back and stay with me, and he would buy cereal, you know, because we didn't have any cereal there. We didn't have any food. We most of the time ate out. And so he would buy cereal for himself. And Schumer, before he'd go to bed, would eat the damn cereal. And my son would always wake up and say, "What the hell happened to my cereal?" I said, "I'm sorry, that's Schumer took care of that."
It's an early Washington lesson. Now, Mr. Secretary, you've lived the most amazing life, and for those of us here in Washington, there's so many aspects of it to learn from and to feast on in Worthy Fights. You go back to the beginning. You talk about when you were running for Congress, which wasn't even near the beginning for you, but you were talking about running for Congress, and you talk about Tip O'Neill, who later was your speaker, came out to campaign for you, and it didn't go so well.
Well, no, Tip came out, and it was wonderful to have him. You know, big Irishman from Boston came out, and we did a fundraiser with Democrats, and Tip went up there, and he said, you know, I want you to do everything possible to work for Leo Panetta.
My good friend Leo.
My good friend Leo Panetta. And he said it several times. And fortunately, most of the crowd kind of took it in stride because, you know, he was enjoying himself. You know, he had a few scotches, and he was in good shape. And everybody enjoyed the evening. But from then on, when I did get elected and I went to Congress, there was another congressman whose name was Norm Panetta. Now, he was Japanese American. And Tip would constantly wind up calling me Norm and called Panetta Leon. And the real problem was the Carter White House screwed it up as well. The Carter White House, when the Italian prime minister came to town, they invited Norm Panetta to the White House. And when the Japanese prime minister came to town, they invited me. And finally, Norm and I put a baseball team together, and we said we played under the sign of the Rising Pizza, which was our team.
Now, one thing that we see in this book, Mr. Secretary, is wheeling and dealing with Congress. We see you helping win passage for President Clinton's crime bill. We saw in Speaker O'Neill a very effective speaker. What is it that he did and that you did then that now is missing?
They rolled up their sleeves and wanted to get it done. So that's probably the best way to say it. Tip O'Neill, who was political, he was a Democrat from Boston. All politics was local with Tip. But Tip had a heart that I think was unmatched in terms of wanting to do the right thing for the country. And so, you know, whether it was Ronald Reagan or Carter or whoever was president, Tip was really devoted to trying to help not only the president, but the country. And so even though it might be somebody from the opposite party, he felt it was important to move legislation, to move proposals forward. I mean, I'll never forget with Ronald Reagan, when Reagan was riding a high, and we brought the budget to the floor, and I was on the budget committee at the time. And we brought the budget to the floor, and we lost the budget vote. Lost the budget vote, which is devastating to a majority party to wind up bringing a budget to the floor and have it be lost. But a lot of the Southern Democrats supported Ronald Reagan, and that happened. And Tip didn't miss a beat. We lost it. The Republican budget came up. It was passed. He didn't stop it. He didn't shut down the Congress. He basically said this place votes by majority rule. And it did. And he lost the vote. But he said, we're going to move on. And we did. And what was refreshing about him was that I think he really respected the fact that the House as an institution has to have the opportunity to vote on issues. And he also believed, I mean, you hear it talked about now, which is regular order. Well, what regular order means is the way the damn legislative process is supposed to work. The president sends up a proposal. It goes to a committee, goes to a subcommittee. Subcommittee holds hearings. Subcommittee marks up, goes to the full committee marks up, adopts the bill, goes to the Rules Committee, and then it goes to the floor, where amendments can be offered on the floor. And that process allows members to be a part of the process, which is missing today. If members can be part of the process, if they can be engaged, then they own a little piece of that bill. And as a result of it, they'll help move it through. And that's why a lot of the legislation in my time was bipartisan.
Now that's
coming out of the committees.
That's also something else that's missing now, is that sort of adept working of Congress. And you have said that there was a grand budget bargain to be had between Boehner and the president. Why didn't it happen?
Well, look, first and foremost, I remember when the whole Simpson-Bowles recommendation came out, and don't forget this was a commission that the president appointed. The president, when they reported their report, and it was bipartisan, there were some members that didn't support it, but it had a bipartisan vote supporting Simpson-Bowles. And the president asked me, should he support it? And I said, you should. You should support this, Mr. President. It's your commission. They've been working at it. It's bipartisan. You may not like each of the pieces, but the fact that they came together is important. And I said, look, if you support this, look, chances are the Congress is going to have a hard time with this proposal. But you will be in the right place. You'll be in the right place. Well, for whatever reason, he didn't support it. And so we go to the budget negotiations, and, there was this kind of back and forth. And Joe Biden was kind of leading the charge to try to develop an approach. I think there was a moment there where if everybody kind of stood by, what they thought they had agreed to, that we could have had a budget proposal. But there was some last-minute wavering, and I don't know whether it was the president or Boehner. It was probably both of them, wavered a little bit. They were getting heat, probably. Boehner was getting heat from his Republicans. I'm sure the president was getting some heat from the Democrats. But at that point, when there was some wavering, that, I think, spelled trouble then.
And I know that you hear an earful as well from people on Congress, Democrats as much as Republicans, about how they feel neglected by this president. Why is it that he's never managed that relationship with the Hill, even with Democrats up there?
I think that, part of the process in this town has to be the engagement with people who are in political positions up on the Hill, who you may not like. Let's face it, governing is tough. Governing means you have to deal with people you may not like. 435 members of Congress, 100, all from different parts of the country. Some are smart, some are not smart, some are honest, some are dishonest. Some want to do the right things, some don't want to do the right things. It's a real mixture. It's a cross-section of America that's represented up there. And there are a lot of people, particularly today, there's probably more in terms of, numbers, of people that are just very tough to deal with. And yet, the challenge in legislation is to engage people.
Why doesn't the president do that?
I think the president, believes that part of it is that he presents an issue and the logic of an issue, and that people should embrace it. And, he's not, the difference between Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, both who are extremely bright, both are capable, both, I think, are quick studies when you brief them in terms of understanding issues. They ask great questions, and deep down, both want to do the right thing for the country. Make no mistake about it. They want to do the right thing for the country. The difference is Bill Clinton loves the political engagement, loves the process of, rolling up your sleeves, dealing with individuals. He loved politics. He loved dealing with members. He knew every member's district. Members would come in and he would say to them, "You're running the wrong campaign." He'd say, "You're running on the wrong issues. Let me tell you what you ought to run on." And he would tell them what the issues were that they would run on. And so he was engaged in that process, and that makes a difference. I think President Obama, is not into that kind of personal political engagement. He wants to work with people. He wants to work with people on the issues. But to get it done, it's like everything else. It is a personal process of basically wooing people, listening to them, understanding what their needs are, understanding how you can convince them what is in their interest to do the right thing. It is that entire process that ultimately results in getting things done. And that's where the president has to engage in terms of dealing with the issues that now confront the country.
One of the many personal relationships that you explore in Worthy Fights is your relationship with Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel. There clearly was a lot of trust there. Tell us about that.
He and I were friends going back to the Clinton administration. When I was chief of staff, I had the opportunity to work with Ehud. We developed a strong friendship. He has a really remarkable background in terms of the history of his family, and he always used to ask me the history of my family, and I told him that. So we both kind of shared, just warm family histories. He plays the piano, I play the piano, and
who better?
Oh, I'm sure he's better than I am, but we both enjoy classical piano, and he is somebody who I found you could really talk with in terms of what is in the interests of Israel, what's in the interests of the United States, and how can we work together to try to serve the interests of both. And as defense minister, when I was Secretary of Defense, we had some tough issues to deal with, because at one point, Netanyahu had indicated that Israel was prepared to go ahead and strike Iran because they were very concerned that Iran was developing this enriched fuel, that they could speed to the development of a nuclear weapon. And so their feeling was this represented a threat to the state of Israel, and they had the obligation, this is how they view things, they have the obligation to protect their country, and that's what they were going to do. And I can remember the president was worried about that we were suddenly going to have a war break out in the Middle East. I talked with Ehud about it. I said, look, we share the same goal. We do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but if you attack them, you're just going to give them a black eye. They're going to come back. You will have destroyed the international coalition that has developed all of these sanctions and put pressure on Iran. I said, and besides that, they'll then come back with a vengeance in terms of developing a nuclear weapon. Whereas if we do this together, the United States has an even greater capability to make sure that we really do damage their ability to develop enriched fuel. And we talked it through, and ultimately Ehud thought that we did have a better capability to frankly do it if we had to strike them. And I think a combination of him, talking with Netanyahu and others, convinced them that they were willing to hold off until we could see what happens with Iran and ultimately the negotiations. So it was a strenuous moment for me, but the joy I had was working with him. We also worked together on providing military aid to Israel, and one of the one of the weapons we provided to them was a weapon that involves these missiles that can strike down the missiles that were coming out of Gaza recently. And it was very effective at bringing down those missiles, almost 90% in terms of effectiveness. And both of us were responsible for helping to put that weapon in place.
In the very kind and eloquent introduction that we just heard, there was a quote from a very favorable review of Worthy Fights in Sunday's Outlook section on the cover by David Ignatius. The headline of that review is, "Why didn't Panetta speak up sooner?" David Ignatius says, "Would it have been better to speak out at the time and perhaps even resign on principle?"
Well, frankly, I was always one who believed in speaking up and letting the president know my views. I never hesitated that way, and I've done that throughout my life. I always thought it was important. I did it with Bill Clinton, and I did it with Barack Obama, which is to tell them what you think. Tell them, if you think they're going to do the right thing, tell them if you think they're going to do the wrong thing. They may not like you. They may not like your views. But on the other hand, they should. The President of the United States should not have just a bunch of yes people around.
And does this president have that?
Well, I think at the time I was there with the National Security Council, no, there were a lot of people.
What about now?
Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton and others that I think spoke their mind. I don't know now. I honestly don't. I can't speak to how it works now. There are some good people there, obviously.
But do you worry that there isn't? Do you worry there aren't enough voices?
I worry that you have got to have individuals on the staff or in the National Security Council that are willing to challenge what's being presented and tell the president about their concerns about certain paths that may be taken. That is extremely important. I can't tell you how true this is, but I've seen it as Chief of Staff to Bill Clinton. And I've seen it, in the White House under this president, and I'm sure it's true under other presidents. People get in a room with the President of the United States, and they're immediately intimidated. And they don't want to say something to the president that might offend them. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I've often sensed, even in the National Security Council, is that sometimes everybody's trying to read the president. Just where is he going? And then they all try to then march in line. And it's really important for a president of the United States to be exposed to a lot of different views. The president ultimately makes the decision, but to be exposed to a number of views that can present to him, what are the consequences of different decisions and what's the impact in terms of the country. So, to go to your question, I would state my position and present it. And sometimes the president would agree, sometimes not. I do have to say in the 4 years that I was there, I think the president largely agreed with the operations we were involved in, agreed with what we were trying to do at the Department of Defense.
That's not much of an endorsement. He largely agreed with the operations?
Well, he embraced those operations, but there was always some of the operations where, you had to, there was a discussion as to just exactly how we would do it, and we might do some revisions as a result of that. But he strongly supported the operations that we were involved with, and I think he was right in doing that. Certainly he supported the operation against bin Laden, which was very risky, and I give him tremendous credit for making the right decision on that.
Now, Mr. Secretary, the line in your book that's gotten the most airplay is, too often, in my view, the president relies on the logic of a law professor rather than the passion of a leader. You're now the second SecDef in a row whose memoir questioned this president's facility and spirit as commander-in-chief.
No, look, there's nothing wrong with having, the approach of a law professor in dealing with some of the issues that you have to confront as president. I don't mind presidents who, use a law professor's kind of approach to analyze issues. But in the end, they need to have the heart of a warrior. They need to be able to take on the battle and get it done. And that is the challenge. And I've seen this president do it, but I would like to see him do it more. I would like to see him engage, in the battles that have to be fought in order to try to get legislation passed on the Hill. I would like to see him engage in the effort to try to do what needs to be done to get a budget deal passed, to get immigration reform passed, to get infrastructure funding done, to get trade legislation passed, to do an energy bill for this country. These are all important issues. And I know that Congress is, resistant, and they're tough, and there are people there that basically want to tear down the government and not make it work. But you can't just sit back and say, I guess we can't get it done. You cannot say that. You've got to continue to push. You've got to continue to look for openings. You've got to continue to work with those people who will work with you. It demands constant pressure to be able to make it work. That's the nature of being a president of the United States, is that you have to constantly be in the ring fighting for what's right for this country.
Have you heard from the president since the book came out?
I have not.
Uh,
We sent him a copy of the book. Actually, we sent it a couple months ago, but I never heard anything, in terms of commenting on the book.
How do you take that? How do you take that?
I don't know how they'll take it. I assume that they probably have now read the book.
Safe to say. What do you think your next encounter with the president will be like?
I really have been around almost 50 years in politics. And I've engaged presidents, and I've engaged members of Congress. And, sometimes you challenge people, sometimes you fight people in the process. But in the end, you roll up your sleeves and you say that's all part of what our democracy is all about. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. And I respect those that I work with, and I respect this president. I want him to succeed in every way. I respect the office of the presidency. I certainly will continue to respect him and the office no matter where I meet him.
That same cover of Sunday's Washington Post Outlook had a second piece by Aaron David Miller with the headline, Disappointer in Chief. Why has this president failed to meet so many people's expectations?
Well, look, I think that the president has, certainly in the first term, I think he did take on the issue of the economy and was able to turn the economy around. I think that is to his credit. He took on the issue of health care and was able to put the Affordable Care Act in place. That is to his credit. I think he made the decision on bin Laden, which was a tough decision. I think that's to his credit. I mean, I think that for the first 4 years, this president was a very strong president when it came to, being able to push the issues that he wanted and being able to provide the leadership on foreign policy issues that he needed to provide. I think that in the process of doing that, there are these deliberations. There are part of the process in the White House, and I remember Bob Gates being concerned about it. He wrote it in the book, which was that, when you're in the National Security Council and you're Secretary of Defense, you feel like you want to be able to have the president hear what you have to say. And I think there was a sense that the staff, in the White House sometimes got to the president first or tried to move the president in a certain direction and then wanted the Defense Department to go along with that particular position. And I think that's what offended Bob Gates, because he is somebody who believes in the process of policy making in the
And did you
National
have a
Security
similar?
Council.
Did you have a similar
Oh
experience?
yeah, no, I had some of the same experiences in dealing with the staff, and for that matter, I'm sure that Secretary Clinton did as well. So some of that is frustrating dealing with it.
But just to stick on this for a second, what did you experience that either disappointed or frustrated you in regard to the staff?
It's the process of having your policy people develop a strategy, develop the elements of that strategy as to what you think should be presented. And as you're about to present it, having White House staff basically say, no, don't do that, do this, or do something else to try to affect exactly what you were presenting. And I think the president is entitled to the best views from the Secretary of Defense, from his military leaders, and that those shouldn't be shaped necessarily by what the White House staff wants. What the White House staff needs to do is to allow a process that provides the best views from the Secretary of State, from the Secretary of Defense to be presented so that the president ultimately could make a decision, not to backdoor the process in order to shape those decisions before they go to the president.
You've seen this president behind the scenes more than almost anyone, and as a leader, as a manager, as a person, what's he like behind the scenes? In the book, you write about how President Clinton, to blow off steam and to doodle, would work crossword puzzles. What does this president do?
I don't think he does crossword puzzles. I think he's very serious-minded. He basically, looks at the issues, reads into the issues, and pretty much.
No, but what's he like? Does he joke around? What's he like? No. I think he likes basketball. We talk about basketball sometimes. Likes some of the sports that are going on. We'll talk about that. But he's not a chatter.
He's not a chatter. He's somebody who's. He sure as hell isn't Bill Clinton in terms of chatting. So he's much more serious-minded. He's much more disciplined. Bill Clinton was not very disciplined. But Barack Obama is very disciplined in the way he behaves. So it's a very different character. And for me, I know Bob Gates kind of reflected a frustration with that process. But I have to tell you, for me, I understand kind of that process, having been through it as chief of staff, and certainly having been in politics. I understand that kind of process that goes on there. In the end, I really do think that even though we had to fight our way to it, even though we had to fight sometimes the White House staff in the process, that in the end, the president would pretty much agree with the positions that we recommended. And Gates said that, and I said that in the book as well.
Doesn't sound like a very pleasant place.
No, you don't want to go to the White House if you're looking for pleasant. Go to the Caribbean or go to Hawaii, but don't go to the White House. The White House is, it is a place where you have to engage. If you want to get it done, you got to roll up your sleeves and you got to, get into the process. And, frankly, I like the process of engaging with people. Even though they may not agree with you, the challenge of talking, of debating, of saying why you should do something was really important. Let me give you an example. We had captured a number of Russian spies who had been placed here at one point. And we had to proceed to arrest those spies because we were concerned that one of them might go back to Russia. So there are 10 of them. Very smart move by the Russians. They place them here a long time ago. They develop their community relations. They marry. They have children. They become part of the community. And then ultimately they move into spying. Well, fortunately, we were aware of what they were doing. We were going to proceed to arrest them. And the problem was that the president was meeting with Medvedev. And so there were some people that said, maybe we shouldn't arrest him because it might upset our relations with Russia. And I said, excuse me? We've got Russian spies here. I want you to envision the Washington Post headline. If we don't arrest these people and pick them up. And even though there had been some debate, I could see the lights go on in their eyes when I said that. And the result was they said, okay, we should go ahead and do this. And we did. And thank God we did it.
So with the
that's part of the process.
Yeah.
You have to engage it.
So the takeaway there is that when the secretary says, "Excuse me," like you should pay attention. Now, Mr. Secretary, today, while you were shopping at Costco, the White House Press Secretary, Josh Earnest, said that our strategy against the Islamic State is succeeding. His full sentence is, "We're in the early days of the execution of that strategy, but certainly the early evidence indicates that this strategy is succeeding." Is that true?
You know, I think that the right pieces are in place. I think it's being tested, though. I think the jury's still out as to, whether or not ultimately we're going to be on the right path in terms of dealing with ISIS. I think the right pieces are in place. We've got our troops trying to help with the Iraqis. We're going to be arming the rebels. We've got airstrikes. We've got a coalition, pretty strong coalition put together to try to go after it. But ISIS is well-trained, well-funded. They are individuals who are well-armed, and they have combat command that knows how to make this move on the ground. They're going against Kobani. They're moving in Anbar province. They are hitting us on different fronts. I think we are the ones that are going to have to be able to adapt to their strategy and be able to confront them. We're in the process of doing that. I have full confidence that we'll be able to do that, but it is going to take time. It is going to take time. And we may very well suffer some losses in the interim.
And Mr. Secretary, when you say the jury is out on whether we're on the right path, what worries you about the current path?
I think the key is that you really do need to have sources on the ground that can tell you what is happening and what's taking place, so that you know what the targets are that have to be struck. You know what the dynamic is in terms of the ground forces that are moving and trying to make a difference. Now, in Iraq, I think it's pretty clear that we can develop, I think, Iraqi security forces to be able to go in and retake the land that was lost. The real key there is whether or not we can get the Sunnis to be part of that effort. If we can get the Sunnis to be part of a National Guard, part of an effort to do it, then I feel very confident that we're going to be able to move that in the right direction. Syria is a much different ballgame. It's chaotic. We don't know exactly what's going on the ground. And the key is, can we develop the sources we need in order to be able to get that done? Understand, in counterterrorism, which we've been involved with for a long time now, the key to counterterrorism is having the ability to identify those targets, the leadership, what the targets should be, and being able to hit those targets. To develop those sources in Pakistan took us 3 years. To develop those sources in Yemen took us 1 year. So it's going to take time to develop the sources of information we need in order to be able to conduct the operations that I think would be effective at disrupting and ultimately defeating ISIS.
And one more on this. On Sunday, on State of the Union, Senator McCain said to Candy Crowley of ISIS, "They're winning and we're not."
I think that's going pretty far for Senator McCain to say that that's the case, because they obviously have moved forward. They've gained territory. They do represent a threat, but these airstrikes have been effective at stopping the momentum, at really inhibiting their ability to move as fast as they wanted to move. So we have been effective at stopping the momentum. The real question is, can we continue to do that? Can we continue that pace? And can we continue to hit the right targets so that we are effective in using airstrikes? That's going to be the challenge. But I really do think that we've come a long way in this war against ISIS, and that we've at least set them back. The real challenge now is, can we move against them in a way that can not only disrupt them but defeat them?
Now, Mr. Secretary, you've mentioned Secretary Gates' autobiography a couple of times. In Worthy Fights, you have a great moment when you're the DCIA you're getting ready to make this extraordinary move over to SecDef, and you first learned that the job was going to be open when Secretary Gates took you aside after a meeting, and he said, Leon, I'm about ready to go, and I just want you to know that I'm going to recommend you to succeed me. And in the book, you point out that he left something out. In the book, you say, I didn't know then, and only learned from Bob's memoirs, that he'd also suggested Hillary Clinton, Colin Powell, and Michael Bloomberg.
No, that's right. And you know, Bob Gates, when he said that, we had gone to lunch we used to have regular lunches for the intelligence operations, CIA, DNI, and others within the intelligence operations, DIA, to talk about intelligence issues with the secretary. And so it was after one of those lunches when he pulled me aside and said, you know, I want you to become Secretary of Defense. And I said, you know, I said, Bob, I said, no, I said, I really do think it's time for me to go home. We just got bin Laden. I said, it's a good time to get the hell out of here and go home. You know, when you leave Washington, leave on a high. And so I said, you know, I really want to go home. You know, I've done this. We did well, and I think it's necessary. He said, no. He says, I need you to do this. I think you know, you understand the troops. You understand the need to really protect them, and do it. And I just I really resisted. I said, go and get somebody else. Look at others, because there are others. I said, Colin Powell and others. I said, they ought to be recommended and do the same thing. And then, you know, Bill Daley, who was the chief of staff, then followed that up and basically made the same offer. And I told Bill, I said, Bill, I said, look, talk to others, because this is, I really don't want to do this. And I'll tell you the reason was, I said, you know, I don't want to stay beyond 4 years in the administration. And if I'm Secretary of Defense, you know, frankly, you ought to have somebody that's going to stay longer in that position. And they said, no, it doesn't make any difference. You know, you'd be great. Do it. Get it done. I just said, no. I said, look at others and try to make that decision. And then I think it was on one of the flights back to Washington where the president called me directly on the plane and indicated that he wanted me to take that position. And again, you know, throughout my life, when the President of the United States usually asks you to do something out of respect for the office, you do it.
When you read your book next to Secretary Gates' book, you have the feeling that on some of these national security questions, there haven't so much been camps, as we so often say in the press, but there have been times when the president has either taken action or more often resisted action that's almost him and all the advisors on different sides. Did you experience that? Do you agree with that, Reed?
You know, I have to say, when I was there, you know, there was a very good give and take in the National Security Council, and that we all had a chance to kind of present our views to the president. You know, look, as a matter of fact, when we did the bin Laden operation and the president went around that table and asked for everybody's views, you know, many of the people around that table thought that the operation was too risky. I could understand it. We didn't know for sure whether bin Laden was there. We were going to have to fly 150 miles at night into Pakistan and be able to conduct this commando operation, not really knowing what kind of resistance we would run into. So there were a lot of people around the table, including Secretary Gates, who was very concerned about the risks involved, as were others. And you know, I remember when the president asked me, I said, look, Mr. President, you know, I have an old formula that I've used going back to Congress, which is that when you face a difficult decision, think about asking the ordinary citizen in your district, if you knew what I knew, what would you do? And if the ordinary citizen knew that we had the best information on the location of bin Laden since Tora Bora, and that this was the one opportunity to try to get our number one enemy, I think the average citizen would say you have to do this. And in addition to that, I had tremendous confidence in the ability of special forces to conduct the operation. Now, the president didn't decide that night. And frankly, if you had to count around that table, I'd say probably there was a majority that were opposed to the operation.
And you were for?
I was for it, and I think Secretary Clinton was for it, and there were others that were for it as well. But I didn't know. Next morning, we had everybody in place, and the president called and said that it was a go. So, it's that process is okay. I think that's the way it should work. Everybody has to present their views, but in the end, the President of the United States makes the final decision.
Now, we've heard the president talk about how that weekend he then had to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, do a comedy routine, and keep the secret. We learn in this book that you also, at that dinner, you were at Time Magazine's table. You, too, had to keep the secret.
Yeah, no, we had to all keep our mouths shut.
Okay,
we had to laugh at the jokes on Bin Laden, that were going on at the time.
So I wasn't going to ask you this, but when you were named DCIA, I had this thought, so I have to ask you. When you were on the Hill and even in the White House, you were, and we're very grateful for this, you were not known for being discreet. And you become DCIA, SecDef, suddenly are the keeper of the secrets. How did you pull that off?
It was tough as hell. It was tough as hell because, you're right. As a member of Congress, I was very much engaged with the press and would talk with them about what was going on, and was always enjoyed that relationship. And even in the White House, as Chief of Staff, enjoyed a good relationship with the press and with others, and really kind of liked the give and take of the process. And now I'm CIA director, and I got to keep my mouth shut. And it's much tougher because you still want to have that engagement. You still want to be able to say what's going on and what's happening. That's one of the things you like about this town is the ability to kind of look at different pieces and who's on first and who's not getting anywhere, and who's trying to screw who. That's all kind of fun in this town. But as director of the CIA, we had to keep it confidential. A good example was on the plane when I would take a trip as CIA director. There was no press. We didn't bring press along. And so, I'd go into a country and they'd take me to wherever I went, visited with the leadership, went to visit with our stations, and got out of town. When I was Secretary of Defense, we had a whole horde of people from the press that were part of our contingent.
So are you saying you got sick of Jeremy?
Yeah. I'd sick him on them, and try to be able. And frankly, the first few times when I was Secretary of Defense, got in trouble for making comments that I would make to people on swear a little bit. I'll share with you the story. Gandolfini, when he played me in this movie, Zero Dark 30, he wrote me a note, and he said, "Look, I'm Italian. You're Italian. I know you don't like the way I played this role, but I really have a great deal of respect for you." And I called him up. I had met him a couple times before, and I said, "Look," I said, I'm just glad they picked an Italian to play my role." I said, but you did a great job in the movie. It's a movie, and you really were fine." He said, "Yeah." He says, "But there was one thing that really bothered me, was that they made me swear a lot." And I said, "That's the one thing you got right."
And speaking of swearing, there's a rumor in here about Rahm. Well, there's two things about Rahm. One is, you said there was a rumor that after you worked together in the Clinton White House that he got his language from you?
I doubt that very much.
And in here you tell about when he worked for you in the Clinton White House, a brass plaque that he had on his desk. was the undersecretary for, we can't say it on the live stream.
I was going
but-
to say,
Yeah.
this is a mixed audience.
Yeah. So I want to bring you into the
But
conversation.
Rom, by the way, Rom, the story that I do tell in the book is that, Rom is a real go-getter. And he moves and he does it, and sometimes, he'll step on anybody to try to get it done. And the president, said, actually him and both George Stephanopoulos, the president said, I really think we ought to move them out. And, I was becoming chief of staff, and I had worked with George, and of course had worked with Rom. And, they're both very bright, capable people who have a good pulse on the political side, especially George. And Rom was somebody, when you tell him to take a hill, he takes the hill. And so I didn't really want to lose them. And so I kept saying to the president, look, let me work with them. Let me bring them under my wing, and we'll try to make sure that that I control what they're involved with. But I really do think that they could be valuable. And so I managed to instead of having them just kind of walk into meetings, I would bring them in when I wanted them to be part of a meeting. And I think it really worked out, and the president finally became comfortable with the fact that they were there, because both of them were extremely bright, extremely able. And I think it's an example that sometimes, people who are good may be tough, may be brazen, may get in your face, but the key is, do they do the job? And if they do the job, you damn well want to keep them.
All right, we'd love to bring you into the conversation. There's a couple microphones here. Please feel free to come down, and we'll take your questions while you're doing that. In this book, a number of times, Secretary Clinton is on the same side of an argument as you, and the effect of this will be that should there be a Clinton presidential campaign, this will be very helpful.
Well, I'll leave that up to the candidates to decide. There are some, one of the things I try to do in the book is to basically kind of shake the system a little bit so that people understand that, in order to really get things done that you have to do, you do have to roll up your sleeves and you got to fight for it.
And you're saying she did.
She fought. She was a tough fighter.
What was she like behind closed doors?
She was very tough, but she was very thoughtful. She knew the issues. She didn't speak without knowing the issues and what she was saying. And I think it was always effective. When she did speak up, people listened.
Because in a debate, if she wants distance from President Obama, she'll be able to say, don't listen to me, listen to Secretary Panetta.
Well, I'm sure I'll be quoted a lot, both good and bad.
No, was that the intention? Was that your intention, or is that simply the effect?
No. I wrote the book to basically tell my story. I'm pleased that I did, but others will do with it what they will.
Sir, please say who you are.
Hi, I'm Frank Schwing, a longtime Monterey resident. I'm wondering if you could add Governor of California to that bucket list.
I've been in public life almost 50 years, and going back to my time in the Army and all the other positions that I've held, and I've really enjoyed it. That's the story that I tell in the book, is all of those positions. And I really do now enjoy going back to my home and to my wife and to our dog Bravo and to our sons and our grandchildren, and having the opportunity to enjoy my family. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And also, we do have an Institute for Public Policy, the Panetta Institute for Public Policy, to try to inspire young people to get involved in public life. I really do think that we have to get young people interested in getting into public life, because they represent our future, and very frankly, they're the ones that are going to have to make a difference.
Good question, sir.
Sure, Kyle Spector from DC. There's been a lot made in the past couple weeks since your book came out about centralization of the White House. You talked about the White House staff kind of controlling a lot. People saying that this National Security Council is making a lot of tactical decisions instead of providing strategy to the president. I'm curious, do you think that's the case? And if the process is broken, as you mentioned earlier, what should we do to fix it?
Well, you know, it's a good question. And look, by the way, it hasn't just happened in this administration. This has been a process that's been developing over the last 20 to 30 years in White Houses. What has happened is that more and more power has become centralized in the White House and in the White House staff. And a lot of what you're seeing is reflective of drawing kind of the decision-making process away from departments, away from the Department of State, away from the Department of Defense, and bringing those decisions into the White House through the White House staff. Now, no question that proximity to the president is power. The closer you are to the president, the more power you have. And so what has happened is that more and more of these issues, domestic issues, defense issues, national security issues, are drawn into the White House. And the result is that, you know, that churns out usually a lot of the decision-making process. And so when the departments are called in, you know, they're playing catch-up. They're playing catch-up. And it distorts the way the process should work. And, you know, I understand presidents get comfortable with having the people around them. You know, they can walk down the hall and walk into an office and talk to somebody about a problem that's taking place or a crisis that's taking place. And so members of the cabinet are not really part of that process anymore. Members of the cabinet are largely used for photo ops, you know, in the cabinet room in the White House.
That's quite an extraordinary statement.
No, but it's true. It's true. I mean, you know, people who are very good, by the way, and capable. I mean, most of you probably, you know a few of the cabinet members. Most of them, you know, you don't remember who they are. And the fact is, they're good people. They're trying to run their departments. They know their departments. They know the policies, but they aren't brought into the process the way they should be. And so, you know, somehow, what you have to do, I really do think you need to begin to reduce the amount of people in the White House staff. You still have, you know, the key positions. And you've got to open that process up more to those that are in these key positions in the administration so that they can play a better role in providing their views, not only to the White House, but to the president as well.
So we have lots of questions, so we're going to do it rapid round style. Very quick question, a very quick answer. Ma'am.
Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, I was there as a staffer of Karen Strasser-Kaufman when it was dedicated. In your book is only a cursory note, 2 mentions, but the legacy that you have created by fighting, and it was a long time fight for that, to effectively ban offshore oil drilling of most of the coast of California, of the Pacific coast, that's major, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. It's one of the worthy fights that I talk about was the fight to protect our coastline. Just very quickly, it happened during the Reagan administration. Secretary Watt, you know, as head of the Interior Department, decided to put up the whole coast for sale and to the highest bidder for oil sales. And I remember going to Watt and saying, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I understand you got to do, you know, sell some of these areas for oil drilling, but what about Big Sur? What about these national treasures? You want to protect them for the future." And he said, no, let's just make the process work through. So that's when we were able to put legislation together that stopped that process from moving forward. And ultimately what I did was introduce legislation to create the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which protects that area for the future. So it was a great fight.
Hi, I'm Erica. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really curious about the tension between short-term response and playing the long game when it comes to security and terrorism. And I'm just wondering, how do you strike the balance between responding in a way that is effective versus
Well, that's a very good question, and the reality is that, you know, when you're implementing defense strategy, it has to contain both a short-term element and a long-term element. The short-term element, basically, if we're using ISIS as an example, is that you've got to stop their momentum. That's the short-term strategy. You've got to stop them. So, air attacks, whatever it takes, you've got to basically stop the momentum that's going on. At the same time, you've got to be thinking about what is the long-term strategy here? What are the long-term objectives? And part of the problem, that I think everybody recognizes, is that in Iraq, I can see the objectives there. We can put the Iraqi military together. I think we can get them in the right place. We get the Sunnis to be part of that. And we have a ground force that can hopefully move against ISIS and regain the territory that's been lost. We can do that backing it up with airstrikes and with help with our people on the ground embedded with their force. I can see the objective there, and I can see a clear path to really being able to push them back. Syria is much more difficult, and I don't see that kind of clear picture about just exactly how are we going to deal with Syria. Yes, we're going to try to develop an opposition force. That's going to take time. We don't even know if there is something called a moderate opposition force that we can really make work there. So that's going to take time. In the meantime, what the hell do you do in terms of confronting ISIS? You need to have targets. You need to be able to stop them from doing some of the things that they're doing. So Syria is going to be a much tougher game to try to think out. But if you're going to conduct a war against ISIS, you have got to think both about the short term to make sure you're putting them on their heels, but you have also got to think about that long-term objective in order to ultimately defeat them. And that's going to take a longer period of time. Sir.
Good evening, sir. Andrew Schneider from DC. Sort of following on the last question, but looking a little bit beyond Iraq and Syria, as we move since 13 years since 2001 and moving into a new era of counterterrorism, I wonder what you think about why we fight. What is the goal for a counterterrorism strategy? What does victory look like?
Good question. I consider all of what we're doing now as part of a kind of larger continuum that goes back to 9/11. I mean, we all have short-term memories in this country. I just had a chance to visit the 9/11 memorial in New York City, and it's a punch in the stomach to walk through that memorial and see what happened to this country and what happened on that day. It's tough to bring those memories back. But the fact is we were attacked. We were attacked by Al-Qaeda. They killed 3,000 people as a result of that attack. We went to war against Al-Qaeda, a war on terrorism, because they were an enemy, because they attacked us, and because we did not want them to attack us again. So we went to war. And frankly, we did a pretty good job at going after them using counterterrorism capabilities. We did undermine the strength of their leadership. But now we've got this metastasis that's taking place with ISIS, with Boko Haram, with Al-Shabaab, with other elements involved in terrorism. I think we need a comprehensive strategy to deal with terrorism. Part of it is counterterrorism, using that capability to target leadership, to go after them, to undermine their ability to ever be able to attack this country. Part of this has to be cultural, educational, and dealing with how do we prevent young people from choosing Al-Qaeda, choosing ISIS as something they would do. That is a much tougher strategy, but it has to be part of how we address the threat of terrorism. We can't just do this on the military side. We have got to do this on the side of how do we improve their opportunities for the future, their education, their ability to enjoy the opportunities that life has to offer. To do that, we are going to have to work with other Arab countries to get that across. Saudi Arabia is doing some of that. The UAE is doing some of that. I think we have to incorporate those kinds of strategies as part of the effort to address this war on terrorism.
Dear Mr. Secretary, I'm Aviva. I'm a PhD student in public policy. Thank you very much for your terrific speech in public service. So what do you think about the role of the United States comparing to the role of the United Nations in today's international peace and security? Thank you.
Oh, real good question again. You know, obviously, all of us would love to have a United Nations that could work effectively to try to deal with the crises in the world. And I think that was the design of Franklin Roosevelt, of Harry Truman, in establishing the United Nations, is that this would be the primary vehicle to hopefully deal with crisis, to hopefully deal with the challenges in the world. Unfortunately, the United Nations has bogged down, particularly in the Security Council, in its ability to respond to crisis. And so almost any time a crisis breaks out, you know, you would like the UN to respond. That's probably the best way to try to get countries together to do it. And then immediately it hits the wall of vetoes in the Security Council and nothing happens. So ultimately, it continues to fall back on the shoulders of the United States to respond. I mean, as the president himself says, when people get in trouble, they don't call Russia, they don't call China, they call the United States. And as we've seen in recent events, if the United States isn't providing that leadership, nobody else will. I wish that were not the case. We all do. We would love to see NATO and Europe and Arab countries coming to fore and saying, let's get together to respond to these crises. But it is the United States that drives that process. And that, frankly, has to be the role of the president, and it has to be the role of this country. We have the value system to ensure that we are the leaders in a world that is facing a number of dangerous threats. Ma'am?
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. We can take 2 more questions, this gentleman, and then you'll have the final question.
Okay. How you doing?
Mr. Secretary, I'm doing well, thank you. It's an honor to speak with you tonight. My question to you, touching on something you spoke about earlier, is what advice would you give a young person today looking to start a career in public service?
You know, I think probably the best advice is to jump in and get involved. As you know, we take polls of young people with the Panetta Institute, and they're discouraging because young people are kind of turned off by the dysfunction in this town. They're turned off by a sense that, you know, public servants aren't really doing what they're supposed to do. They're just fighting each other and not getting things done. So, you know, the inspiration I had to get into public service is, you know, not just my parents, not just the Army, but a president who said, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I looked at public service as a higher calling. Now that's tougher. Now that's tougher. So my recommendation is for those of you that are interested, get in it. Get in, you know, see what it's like. You know, become a legislative assistant on Capitol Hill. Become an intern on Capitol Hill. Get involved somewhere in the public policy section. Learn how the process works or fails to work. Learn from that. Don't get caught up in the damn politics of left and right, and Democrat and Republican. Get in it, learn it, stand back and evaluate what is it then that you can do in order to make a difference. And let me tell you something. The most important thing you need to know is you can make a difference. I felt I could make a difference in the jobs I've had, and I can tell you if young people get interested in government, they can make one hell of a difference. Frankly, I would like the stalemate in this town to change from the top down. I would love it if the president and the leadership of the Congress decided to start working together to deal with it. I don't know if that'll happen, but I do know one thing. If that doesn't happen, it will change from the bottom up. And voters will say, okay, we need to have people who are going to be willing to engage. And you know what? People your age, let me tell you something. Why am I hopeful? Because I've seen men and women in the military, in uniform, put their damn lives on the line to fight and die for this country. And if they're willing to fight and die for this country, then I think there should be leaders that are willing to take a little bit of that risk in order to govern this country.
Perfect question. And thank you. Our speaker tonight is the former student body president of Monterey High, so that's where it starts, and the cleanup batter right here.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie. I'm a senior at the University of Maryland, and I study international relations and government and politics.
Great.
A lot of pressure for the final question, but I've always been interested interested in the relationship between the Department of State and the Department of Defense. Could you speak a little bit more, maybe some interesting anecdotes about one time when you guys went head-to-head in terms of getting a policy through, and then one time when you had to work together to push something through that wouldn't work unless you collaborated?
Yeah. It's, each department obviously has its own bureaucracy, and they all kind of operate in their own area. And yet, when you're dealing with a critical issue, like Afghanistan or ISIS or other things, it's really important that the two work together. That you have the diplomatic arm of the government working with the defense arm of the government to be able to work together to get things accomplished. Frankly, a big part of that is the personalities that are involved. And I just have to tell you, Secretary Clinton and I, because of our history of working together, we were able to work together because, I said to my staff, work with their office to get this done. And so we would set up conferences together, we would go to conferences. We went to the UN together to meet with the defense officials from the different Arab countries to try to develop their security capabilities. She was at the table, I was at the table. We went to Australia, working with the Australians to try to develop and improve that alliance with the Australians. We did things together in Europe, we did things together elsewhere. And having that partnership was very important to our ability to deliver, because it wasn't like we were competing against each other. I mean, too often there's a lot of competition. Who gets the credit for it? Who's trying to get it done? And so, there's kind of a tendency not to really work together. But if there is a strong personal connection, and by the way, don't forget this, in Washington, you can pass laws, you can build bureaucracies, you can build new departments. It doesn't mean a damn thing unless you have good people running those departments and running those agencies. In the end, that's what determines whether or not it works or fails.
We're about to get the hook here, so as we say goodbye, a political question and a personal question. Political question, do you believe that there should be another President Clinton?
I think that there should be, somebody who runs for the presidency who's got great experience and great dedication to this country. If it happens to be named Clinton, that's okay with me.
If Hillary Clinton ran for president, would you support her?
Sure, absolutely.
In the New York Observer in 2008, after her last campaign, the headline was Panetta's Lament, They Had No Plan. It says, for the money they brought in, the Clinton campaign should have done a much better job. How will it be different this time?
Well, I think it's a huge challenge now. I mean, there's so damn much money in politics now that it just scares the hell out of you in terms of, this kind of open warfare that you see playing out on television between the various PACs that are associated with it. And, I understand the game. You got to raise money in order to compete with against money, and I'm sure Clintons do it better than anybody in terms of being able to raise money, and that's okay. But I really do think you have to broaden that effort so that ordinary citizens are contributing funds to a national campaign rather than just relying on big PACs to provide that money. Too much of fundraising is done in New York, Chicago, Silicon Valley, LA, where the big money is, and not enough of that fundraising is done among the American people themselves.
And, Mr. Secretary, just to cross a T, why do you think that she should be president? She is somebody that I've seen who's dedicated to this country. She's smart, she's experienced, and she's tough. What the hell else do you want? And we always end these conversations on a light note. You are a foodie. You were a foodie even before we called them foodies. You always were known for having the best Christmas parties. Where do you like to eat when you're in Washington? And you can't say Costco.
there is no place in Washington that compares to the food I get at home in Carmel Valley. Listen, I make my own gnocchi. For those of you that know what gnocchi is, my mother used to make gnocchi, and she taught me how to make it, and I have yet to go to a restaurant that makes it as good as I do.
The secretaries could be kind to sign some books. I want to thank all of you who are watching in live stream land. Thank Matt Sobocinski, our friends at Politico, for live streaming it. Thank all of you for being here in person. Thank Politics and Prose for pulling this together. Thank Sixth and I for this amazing setting. What a treat. And thank you, Secretary Panetta, for an amazing conversation.